All right, Algebra 1A students. Welcome to part 2 of lesson 5.1. In this video, we're going to talk about how to find the slope of a line not from the graph, but instead from two coordinate points on that line. Okay, so we're going to start by being given two coordinate points in parentheses, right? Coordinate points we know always look like parentheses, and then a number, and then another number after the comma, and then close parentheses, right? So we're going to be given 2 points like this. We're going to be asked to find the slope of the line that goes between those 2 points, okay? So, in our last video, we talked about rise over run, right? Slope being rise over run, which we can still see right down here, rise over run, okay? So in this picture, the rise obviously is how many spaces we have to go to get from this point up to this point, right? This point to this point. And to figure out how many spaces we had to go, we can just subtract the y coordinates, because remember, y means up and down. So if I subtract the two y coordinates, I find the rise of my line from that point to that point. I find the rise by subtracting the two y coordinates, which is exactly what I've done right there. y2 minus y1 just means subtract the two y coordinates. And then we do exactly the same thing with the x coordinates. We take the x coordinates and we subtract those to find how far to the right did we have to go, or left. How far did we have to move left and right? We subtract the two x coordinates, x2 minus x1 right there. The thing we have to notice is that we have to do this in the same order, which I'll point out to you in just a second. But once we subtract those two, we just make our slope fraction with the change in the y, or the y subtraction on the top and the x subtraction on the bottom. Okay. If we look at an example here, we're given these 2 points, -1, 0, and 3, -2. And again, when we see a coordinate point, we have to know that x always comes first and y always comes second. Okay, x comes first and y comes second. So if I'm going to subtract my two y coordinates, right, 1 and 2, if I'm going to subtract these two y coordinates, I can really do it either way I want. I can subtract this one from this one, or this one from this one. I usually subtract backwards, just because that's what my equation says. Do the second one minus the first one. So in this case, that would be -2 take away 0, would be my y coordinates subtracted. -2 take away 0 over my two x coordinates subtracted. And I have to make sure that because I use the -2 first, I use the 3 first that's right next to my -2 when I subtract my x's. 3 minus -1, okay? -2 minus 0, 3 minus -1. What I end up with here is -2 over 3 minus a -1 is like adding a positive 1. 3 plus 1 is 4. Okay, 3 plus 1 is 4. And -2 over 4 we can reduce slightly down to -1 over 2. And that is my slope fraction. I found it just by subtracting the two y coordinates and the two x coordinates and then making a fraction out of them and reducing. Okay? Now, sometimes when we find the slope from 2 points, we're going to end up with zeros in some places. Okay? And we're going to look next at what that looks like on a graph and when we subtract. Okay? So if we're looking at this line in part A where it says what is the slope of this line, the 2 points that they give me for this line are -3 in the x, 2 in the y, and 2 in the x, 2 in the y. Okay, so notice down here I have those points listed. And again, I'm just going to subtract my two y coordinates, which are a 2 right here and a 2 right here. Right, I subtract the two y coordinates. 2 take away 2. 2 take away 2 is 0. And my two x coordinates, which I subtract, 2 take away -3, right? This x coordinate minus that one. 2 take away -3, again, minusing a negative is like adding a positive. 2 plus 3 is 5. So what I end up with is a slope of 0 over 5. Okay, and 0 over 5, 0 divided by 5 really is 0. Okay, so the slope here is 0, and what's neat is that the slope of any horizontal line is 0. So anytime you have a line that just goes straight across from left to right like this, the slope of that line is going to be 0 every single time. The slope of any horizontal line is always 0. Okay. Now, if we look at this other option over here, these coordinates that they give me for my 2 points are -2 in the x, -2 in the y. Right here, -2, -2, and -2 in the x, 1 in the y. -2, +1. Okay, -2, -2, -2, +1. So if I subtract my 2 y coordinates, I get 1 take away -2. 1 take away -2 is like adding a positive, so I get 3. And then I do the same thing for my x coordinates. -2 take away -2. -2 take away negative. Again, subtracting a negative is like adding. -2 plus 2 gets me to 0. Okay, so now what I have is this fraction here, 3 over 0. Right, that's 3 divided by 0. One thing we have to remember is that we can't divide by 0. Okay, we absolutely 100% cannot divide by 0. We can't do it. Can't divide by 0. Okay, so when we do something, when we divide by 0, we end up with a slope that is called undefined. Okay, undefined. Make sure that word gets written down and that you understand the slope of actually any vertical line, not just this one in particular, but any line that goes straight up and down like this, the slope of that line is undefined. Okay, so a horizontal line left and right, the slope is 0. Up and down a vertical line, the slope is undefined. Otherwise, your slope will just come out to be a regular number, sometimes a fraction. Okay? So what I'd like you to do is look at these two here. Subtract your 2 y coordinates, then subtract your 2 x coordinates, and make a fraction for the slope, and then do the same thing right here. Subtract your 2 y's first, the -3 and the -3, and subtract the 2 x's, make a fraction, then come on back and I'll show you what we should have. In part A, our answer should be 5 over 0, which we know is called undefined. That one would be a vertical line. Slope is undefined. Over here, I end up with 0 over 6. 0 over 6 is a slope of 0. Okay, so in this case, we would say slope equals 0. Okay, so this slope is undefined because the 0 ended up on the bottom of the fraction. Here the slope is 0 because it ended up on the top. If you have questions about how to find slope from 2 points or what it means when we end up with a 0 or a vertical or horizontal line like these, please make a note to ask me in class tomorrow. Otherwise, that's all I have for you. Have a wonderful night.